And I remember there was a young man that was continuously like hinting. For some reason, he felt comfortable with me, and I never talked to anyone about this stuff. Like, I just didn't. And he kept hinting to me like he wanted to tell me something. And it was one of those feelings that came over me like at family weekend this weekend. Let me just say what I got, like what's on my mind, like what I'm feeling in the universe and in my heart and soul right now. And I told him about all this. And this kid just breaks down in absolute tears and gave me the biggest hug. And like, again, it goes back to all the resentment and anger and hate I had in my heart. To, for the first time ever, I experienced a moment where everything that I had been through in that scenario, one of the most painful things I've ever been through in my life that carried the most weight, was useful to somebody else.
Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we've got Benjamin B.
What's happening, everyone?
And we got Dr. T.
Hello, hello.
First things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, whichever one that you choose to use. And thank you for watching on YouTube. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us. info@realrecoverytalk.com. Again, that's info@realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, we want to help you turn your mess into your message. Right, Ben?
Yes, sirree.
Right, T?
Right.
Oh, how you guys doing? How was the weekend? Good?
Good, yeah.
It's Tuesday, so you had a day, you know.
Yeah.
Yesterday was Monday. Mm-hmm. T, you're back to work this week?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, you took a mini... Was that a vacation or a staycation?
No, she's week on, week off.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
That's awesome. Did you do anything fun on your week off?
I went to the Hard Rock.
Oh, good. You gambled.
And went to a heat. I did. Unfortunately.
That's okay. Yeah. We don't discriminate. You don't have a gambling addiction, so.
I know.
You know?
I know.
So as long as you're not selling your TV and all your prized possessions to go and gamble, I think it's okay.
Not yet.
Not yet. Good. Yeah. Tell Pierre he's going to have to rein it in. Mm-hmm. No, that's good. What about you, Ben?
What did I do this weekend?
Anything fun?
Coached some football. What else did I do? I don't know.
No,
same old.
That's good. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know what I did. I can't remember. Anyways. So in today's episode, Ben brought up a topic that I don't think we've ever done before. And yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting, something that we've never discussed, but there's definitely a place for it. So it's going to be maybe grab your tissue box, I suppose, is the best thing to put.
I mean, the reality of the situation is people in my position don't talk about it because of fear, I guess.
Yeah. And
it's stuff that's hard to talk about. Let me give it some insight to like what sparked me to really do this. So we had our family weekend this weekend. And I was sitting in the family weekend, and a couple of the parents brought up something that they've seen in their child in the past with some history stuff. You know, and I'm sitting in there and hearing what they're talking about, and I'm like saying to myself, I've been through that. And I'm sitting there listening to our other therapists talk to them. And I'm the only one in the room who has experience with the history that they were speaking to. And you know what? I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to share this. And it was funny because the dad kept looking at me like he kept like grilling me in the eyes, like he knew I had some information that I was holding on to and not saying. So I sat there for like 10 minutes and I'm like, you know what? Screw it. So, like something is telling me to share what I got to share. And you know, I'm not going to share on that topic today, maybe another time.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I didn't even tell you what it is.
On that, yeah.
Yeah, but and I just let me say this too. Somebody posted something the other day. I did put some notes for this one, but what the heck? It's in my what's going on here? It's in my photos. Somebody put up a thing on Facebook that says shame dies when stories are told in safe places. And that was the day after family weekend, and that's what sparked me to be like, you know what, I should talk about this on the podcast. Did you already say what we're talking about?
No.
Oh, okay. So we're going to, I think it'd be valuable if I share my experience with male sexual trauma. Yeah. I've definitely been through some stuff at a young age, and I'll go into some detail about that. And the reason that I want to share it is I think it's selfish to have been through something, come out the other side, and I know that other people go through it, and I like have a solution to this problem, to hang on to that solution out of not wanting to be embarrassed or fearful of sharing it. It'd be selfish. You know, if I have an answer to a problem, who am I to hang on to it?
Well, before we even get into that, which I think it's a great topic, I think that in and of itself is what the whole recovery process is about. People feel guilt and shame about the facts that they're a drug addict. And like, you know, how many times do we see people that are new in recovery that are like, I don't want people knowing about this. I don't want my job knowing about it. I don't want my girlfriend or my boyfriend or my family members or my friends or my community. I don't want them to know about this. And I think that goes to what you were saying. You owe it to people to share this stuff, you know, because you have a solution and people need that solution.
Yeah. So I'll give the little backstory, basically the story of what happened. So I was 5th grade. It was the end of 5th grade going into 6th grade. I grew up here in Palm Beach County, and there is a state park, MacArthur State Park. You know that one?
Yes.
So there was during the summer, they did summer camps, like marine biology summer camps, right? So my mom signed me up for it. And I go through this camp. It's like snorkeling and stuff. It's a beautiful park. They've got some awesome snorkeling, guided tours, all kinds of stuff at this park. And I end up going through the camp, and the camp ends, and we get contacted. My mom gets contacted like a couple weeks afterwards and says, hey, they took notice of you. Would you like to come volunteer at the park? Mind you, I'm 10 years old. Would you like to come volunteer at the park and run on every other weekend? They do like a snorkeling tour open to the public. The public comes in, they pay their $10-15, whatever it was. But basically what I was doing is there was a gentleman, I'll leave him, I won't call him a gentleman. I shouldn't call him that, to be honest. That's how I feel about it. I'm not going to use his name because the purpose of this is not to, like, out of spite, throw shade, so to speak. Obviously, I'm not fond of this individual, but I for whatever reason, I'm just going to.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they take notice of me, asked me to come do this volunteer spot, and every other weekend, I'm doing these slideshows at MacArthur Park where, like, I'm teaching people about the fish and what you might see out there when you snorkel, and then we take them snorkeling and back, right? So this guy basically worked for the park, takes me, quote unquote, under his wing, and over the course of time, you know, I looking back at it now, like, started grooming my mom. To be straightforward, let me throw this out there too. Mom, Dad, if you're listening, I love you to death. And I want to let you know that I know that you did the best you could as parents, and stuff like this can be hurtful to hear, but the truth is the truth. And I just want you to know I love you, and this has nothing to do with you. And that's kind of why I want to talk about this too, is like the part of the solution is not putting it on other people. But with all that being said, you know, they end up getting groomed. And I end up spending months and months with this guy. Like, he ends up, over the course of time, some things happened where, you know, there's events going on at the park that are extra, Halloween, this, that, the other. Why don't you come, Ben? And he, like, literally come by the house, pick me up. This guy was in his mid-40s at the time. And without going into detail, you know, it ended up a situation where him and I were alone a lot, you know, in a very, what's the manner?
Peculiar?
Yeah, that word works.
Inappropriate. Yeah.
Okay.
Extremely inappropriate. And, you know, there's some bullet points I want to touch on, but basically that's it. Like, I'll just come out and say the part that's the hardest for me to say. My first sexual encounter at the age of 10 years old was with a man in his mid-40s. Not by choice. And it sucks growing up like that.
Yeah.
I wasn't on drugs at the time. And I like to touch on this too. Like, that is not what makes me a drug addict. I'm a firm believer that trauma is gasoline on the fire, but it's not the cause of addiction. I just want to make that clear too. And I'll kind of come back and touch on some of that. But, over the course of time, after this is all said and done, like I remember the last time I saw him was on Halloween night, and I'll get into a little bit more of that, but there was some stuff that I wanted to touch on first. I ended up like walking around all through middle school thinking like the least of I hated myself, point blank period, and it rode into high school. Like I had suicidal ideation all through high school, absolutely hated myself. And I think a lot of it stems from that. My substance abuse at the age of 14. By the time I was 16, I was like a complete junkie. And that is not an exaggeration. Like heroin, first time at 16, but even prior to that, like at 14, putting my hands on anything I could get, Xanax, crack, you name it, pain pills. But it spiraled. And what ends up happening is over the course of time, the very first time I ever spoke of it, I had gone out on a run. And I forget the details, but my mom ended up somehow getting a hold of me. I'd been smoking crack for days, and I think I was in Abacoa, Donald Ross area. My mom comes and picks me up, and the very first time I ever talked about it, I was probably about 20 years old. Wow. And I ended up telling my mom, like, and this was out of spite. Like, I was high and I was angry. And to be perfectly frank with you, like, I weaponized my trauma, which addicts will do that. They'll take their trauma and blame the world and say, this is why I do what I do. And I remember looking at my mom and saying all this. And I don't know that she did it intentionally, unintentionally, but she kind of denied that anything like that would have ever happened. So I took that over the course of time. And she said she ended up looking into it and at first found nothing. So here I am. I think I'm going crazy. I'm like, am I crazy? Well, I'm smoking crack and shooting dope. Like, chances are I'm crazy. And I started questioning myself. And something ended up happening that I wanted to touch on. In 2010, Boy Scouts of America, there was a Department of Justice came out and forced them to release all these private documents where in 2010, 20,000 secret Boy Scout documents were released by Department of Justice, right? So here I'm like questioning myself if I'm crazy. And in my sobriety, because of the internet, all of a sudden stuff starts popping up. And one day I'm on Google, I'm several years sober. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know what came over me. I'm like, let me start looking into this. It was part of my 4-step, part of my resentments, all that. And, the internet comes along and all of a sudden everything's available on Google. And I do want to pull this up. Pardon me for 1 second. So I'm just going to read part of this. My phone's all screwing up here. So I think I'm going crazy. And then years into my sobriety, I come across this article. Person's name had been indicted by the Cuyahoga County grand jury the past 2 months on 39 gross sexual imposition and rape charges. Some instances dating back to 1974, police said. And then it goes on to say all the boys were under the age of 13. He was facing between 5 and 25 years. I couldn't find exactly what it was, but I've got tons of these screenshots on my phone when I was researching it. But that's the gist of it. So this guy is from Ohio, and he comes down. He does his time up there, and this is prior to, I forget if it was 1990 or 91 when I was doing my research, but there wasn't a sex offender registry, right? And I end up, so he does his time, does not get registered as a sex offender, comes down to Florida, does the same thing. So in sobriety, I end up like, okay, I'm not crazy, and going through it, when I sit back and analyze it, and the reason I talk about this is because it did cause me so much pain. I did mistakenly blame my entire addiction on this. And like I said before, I'll keep using the word weaponized it. And thank God I had a sponsor that told me victims don't stay sober, and I got to the point where I wasn't going to allow myself to be a victim anymore. And some of the things that I just want to touch on for people that have been through this. I had a lot of resentment towards the people that quote unquote were supposed to protect me, right? Like looking back, I said, I'm saying to myself, if you saw the way that this man dressed and the way he presented himself, it had pedophile written all over it. Like being a grown man now that has kids, like I'm like, he is the billboard for pedophile. I'm like, and it just blows my mind how this got missed. And like, so I had this huge resentment, even far into my sobriety, again, to be straightforward, against my parents. You're supposed to be protected. And again, like I reiterate, like I said in the beginning, we're all human beings. We do the best we can. I have wonderful, loving parents. Like they would never let anything like this happen to me intentionally. But some of the other stuff that I want to touch on is like another thing that I had resentments against was society. So I'll go into a little bit of detail on this part. I don't want to get like crazy into the details of the physical stuff that happened. But there was one instance, there's a little island called Munyon Island that's right by MacArthur Park. You can take kayaks there, canoes, stuff like that. It goes through the mangroves. And I remember him, I'm taking Ben on a kayak trip. Again, inappropriate. What is a 10-year-old doing with a 45-year-old man that's not a relative going to an island on a kayak trip? Like it just doesn't make sense. And I remember being in the middle of this island, like in the woods, like there's no one around. And this guy did this intentionally. And I remember randomly, like we're literally laying on a blanket. And I remember randomly some random hiker walking through and literally walked with said hi and just walked right by and kept going. And man, did I have resentments against society. Like how that, I thought, where's the Good Samaritans, right? Like you literally stumble upon this and you just don't get involved. Crazy to me. Like if I saw something like that, I know what I would do. But the other thing that I want to touch on, and this was like and this grew into my resentment as well. It involves my Uncle Matt. I've never really talked about him too much on the podcast, but him and he was one of my uncles that I grew up. I was like super close to. We spent the summers together. He would take me in his 18-wheeler, travel the country, and I'd help him with the moving company, stuff like that.
He's the one that took you surfing in Santa Cruz.
Yeah, he was quite the partier too. He was, if I'm frank about it, like I love my uncle to death. He was a good influence on me and also a very bad influence on me. But, with that being said, the last time that I saw this guy on Halloween at the park, my uncle had come to the park with his family to see the Halloween because it was like a haunted house thing that they were putting on. And I just remember my uncle afterwards. I remember like I was to the point where I was so uncomfortable with the situation that I was ready to run. And I think part of the reason it was the last time I saw him is maybe my uncle said something to my parents. My uncle has since taken his own life due to his own drug addiction. So I'll never know the answer to that. But with that being said, going back to how did people not notice? And my uncle, he was just the inappropriate, says what's ever on his mind uncle. I remember like after doing the haunted house, like my part, my costume, like I ran off because I just wanted to get out of there with my family. Like my family's there, I'm safe, I'm running. And I remember this guy taking off running behind me. Like, and my uncle afterwards, he's like, what's with that fucking queer? He's like, who's your mom got you hanging out with? And that's just how my uncle spoke, like just very straightforward. Like he picked up on it instantly. And I never saw that guy I've seen him one time since, but where I'm going with this, again, is to like get to the solution. And I do share this with our clients when we go over the 4-step. When it's appropriate and I see stuff going on and they bring stuff up, I'll be like, I'll bring it around at the end. But, again, lots of resentment, lots of anger, lots of blame, lots of frustration. I thought I was going crazy. Now I know it's all true. And kind of touched on, let me touch on this. The feeling I get in my stomach talking about it never goes away. And the last time I saw this guy, I was actually, remember, I moved to Minnesota to address my drug addiction, got stuck up there for 4 years, never got sober, came back to Florida. But when I came back to Florida, I had been here for maybe a couple years, and I was out at the fairgrounds, and I saw him. And I tell you what, I felt like a 10-year-old again. Mm-hmm. Like my heart sank. Like here is this weak, disgusting man that today I could kill him physically, easily. But like that, what do they call it? Your response?
Trauma response.
Yeah, trauma response, if you will, like came over me. So it's very real. So I understand, like when our clients talk about with our therapists, like the visceral response that they get when this stuff comes up. Like it's a real thing. The anxiety comes from it. People need medications for it sometimes, etc. I believe while you're working through it. But again, getting back to the solution part, I want to reiterate, I weaponize this trauma on everybody. If I had if things weren't going Ben's way in his active addiction, guess what I was bringing up and throwing it right in your face. Well, this happened to me, you don't understand, and this is your fault. Of course I am the way I am. Why aren't you going to help me? Why aren't you going to do what I say? You owe me. Look what you did to me. And what I realized today, you know, and this is the part that I tell the clients. At 10 years old, let me ask you all a question. This is the same question I ask my clients is, what part did I play?
No part. You're 10 years old. You're an innocent child. Especially even back then, we didn't have social media. We weren't privy to a lot of the things that a lot of children are now.
That's what I would say. And that's what I'm going to stick to, but I don't think that's what you're going to say.
No, and this took me a long time to figure out. And that's why I come forward and say it's selfish of me to keep a solution to myself. And it was actually my sponsor that helped me with this, which is funny because he's not a therapist. Mm-hmm. And it was the 4th step of Alcoholics Anonymous that helped me with this. But the part that I played was, did it happen to me? Was I an innocent kid? Could I have done anything about it? I can't sit in morbid reflection. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. Mm-hmm. I was an innocent kid. We'll call it what it is. The part that I played was allowing that man to hold power over me for the next, I'll call it 20 years. I got sober 17 years later, but it was probably 20 years, maybe 25 years. Because it wasn't well into my sobriety that I was able to start thinking clearly enough off of drugs to be able to really process this. And, I wish somebody had pointed this out to me before. And this goes back to the victims don't stay sober mentality that I have. We have to stop being victims in our, mental health. We cannot help. We have clients here that are bipolar. It's genetic, whatever the case may be, schizoaffective, you name it. And there's cases, don't get me wrong, where like mentally maybe they'll never be able to come to this because of their conditions. But while we're not responsible for our mental health or the fact that we're a drug addict, we are responsible for our recovery. The same goes for sexual trauma, is the way that I feel about it. And this is just my experience. Some people might disagree, but I wanted to share what works for me. And so, again, the part that I played was, yes, it happened to me. But to allow that man to have power over me for the next 20 plus years was the insane part on my part. Now, don't get me wrong, I reiterate, like it took me a long time to get back to that point. And let me tell you where it really turned around for me. And it actually had to do with me working in treatment. And I remember there was a young man that was continuously like hinting. For some reason, he felt comfortable with me. And I never talked to anyone about this stuff. Like I just didn't. And he kept hinting to me like he wanted to tell me something. And it was one of those feelings that came over me like at family weekend this weekend. Let me just say what I got, like what's on my mind, like what I'm feeling in the universe and in my heart and soul right now. And I told him about all this. And this kid just breaks down in absolute tears. and gave me the biggest hug. And like, again, it goes back to all the resentment and anger and hate I had in my heart to, for the first time ever, I experienced a moment where everything that I had been through in that scenario, one of the most painful things I've ever been through in my life that carried the most weight, was useful to somebody else. And that kid spilled his guts. And I'll go on to say, like, I'll share this part. As a result of what happened to me, I don't mind being open about this. Like, I felt so low about myself that it definitely did contribute to, like, a lot of my behaviors in my addiction. The ways that I acquired drugs. If I didn't have any money, I did things sexually that I'm not proud of whatsoever. You know, to be straight up with you, like, prostituted myself to both, I'll go ahead and say it's fucking, to both men and women. I built relationships with people that I knew that I was hooked on drugs, and they were like, well, if you do this with me, I'll give you $50 and I could get high. All right, whatever it took, because I hated myself that much and I didn't value myself whatsoever. And it didn't matter because it was already taken from me anyway. Right? So what I wanted to get to, though, is don't hang on to this stuff. Because now, and I've never shared it on a public platform like this. I didn't think I ever would. But I think with the podcast, how it's developed organically, like, dude, we have a platform. And I've always told myself, like, every time I bring it up to somebody else and see that the value that it has for them, and then they're able to start coming to a solution of whatever it is their pain is, why not share it? Because it frees me. Because one of my biggest liabilities is now an asset for other human beings. What was killing me is now helping somebody else stay alive. And what Tom was saying in the beginning, that's what this whole recovery thing is about. There ain't a single freaking drug addict in our group room that hasn't done shit that they're ashamed of. They don't want to tell another soul. And I'm very open now. And I want to give kudos to my sponsor. I've had multiple sponsors at this time. For anonymity, I'll leave them nameless. But it was because of what he shared. When I did my 4-step, there was stuff I wasn't going to share with them. And he knew, he could see it on me that I was holding stuff back. And he shared some of his stuff with me that he's like, let me share some of my stuff with you that I didn't want to share with my sponsor. And it was literally the same shit. And that man gave me the courage to start sharing it with other men. And now when I do 4th and 5th steps, I mention this stuff to my guys. I'm like, hey, you can tell me anything and let me give you proof, because I'm going to tell you first. Because that's how this thing works. And just giving back. So if you've been through stuff like this, don't stay a victim. Don't give that person power beyond the time that you already have. And start utilizing it to help other people, because that's what's helped me. Now, some people may have different experiences, but that's mine.
Yeah. Wow. That was powerful.
Very.
I think that I've heard you mention this before, never in these details, obviously. I think that it's a testimony of what, this, I'm not even going to say this program, but like sobriety in general can do for people, because it's really remarkable. Like the growth that happens with people when they get sober. And I think in what you have gone through, I like that you keep referencing that it's your experience, because somebody else's experience is going to be polar opposite. Mm-hmm. And their healing process is going to be completely different than what yours looks like. And that's okay. Whatever that process is for you is 100% okay. But what I like what you said, in the fact of getting to the point where said person doesn't hold power over me. And that, I think, is the takeaway from all of this. However you get there, that's going to be up to you. But the end goal is actually getting there. And if that's by way of having a therapist, you know, somebody that you trust, whatever that looks like, a sponsor, but getting to that point of yeah, because I remember in early sobriety, even for myself, I heard the phrase, don't let people rent space in your head.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that was like something that I, especially in early sobriety too, because I would harbor resentments towards people, you know, for big things or very minor things. And I always remembered that phrase. And I still to this day, you know, I think of that because it's like, you know, why, you know, what's the point? But that was awesome, dude. I really appreciate you sharing all that.
And we're in a position too, like, I mean, I think about like Dr. T's position too. How many clients come to you and tell you stuff? Like, just I'll use the obvious example. You know, you've probably had to sit down with clients and be like, hey, you're HIV positive, or stuff along those lines. Like, that's got to be a hard conversation to have, you know, and just the hard truths that we hear working in this field.
Yeah.
It can be gut wrenching sometimes. So I do, it's just so important that, and again, like this ties back to like the families, like take care of yourselves or you're never going to be able to help your loved one, you know? And I want to reiterate something just in case mom and dad are listening. I love you guys so much. Like, I want to reiterate, if I haven't been clear about it, I still feel I owe them amends, like, for the weaponization of my trauma. Like I do. Like I've attacked them and used it. And, you know, that's, nobody works a perfect program. Anybody that, like, there's always going to be more amends for me to make. And even the stuff that I, quote unquote, didn't play a part, like being an innocent 10-year-old kid, I ended up playing parts in other ways, if that makes sense. And taking a responsibility and looking back at that, I just think is so important for the healing process and really finding yourself. I have nothing to hide anymore. We talk about Eminem 8 Mile. Like at the end of 8 Mile, the rap battle he does, he outs himself.
Yeah.
Then no one could hold it. Here's my truth. What you got now?
I was listening to that song today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how, and if you don't mind me asking, now with your parents, how did you go about, I know obviously that took time, right? All of this took a lot of time, but did you guys speak about it again after that initial like confrontation? How did it?
Here's where I want to be honest. Again, going back, and I just believe honesty is the best way to go about it. We had talked about it in the past. I think the part that was most hurtful to me was that the message I heard was, no, this didn't happen. My mom did end up saying later that she looked into it, and actually, I forget the number she told me, and I don't know where she got the information, but she said he got fired from the park, and that 5 or 6 other parents complained. To my knowledge, nothing came of it. The guy still lives locally here in the village area.
Just in case.
Just in case. But
oh, you mean the right here
Yeah,
or
village.
in the villages?
no, village. Palm Beach Lakes and Village, right up the road.
Oh, wow.
A couple miles from here. But to be 100% honest, even years into my sobriety, there was times when I was upset and still brought it up with the manipulation tactic, intention, whatever, of like get back into the old habit. And that's the part I feel bad about with my parents. Like even in sobriety, I've done that. Even with having a program and principles and all that in my life, like so again, that part in the big book that says we are not saints, you know, and I did. Even though I did not handle it properly, I don't believe I handled it properly, the way that I spoke to them about it. I do feel relief that everything that I said did get heard. And especially my mom saying, I know something happened. I think being validated by them gave me a lot of closure. And, you know, because again, like this goes back to like, I don't want them to feel responsible for what happened. Part of me is like, has always been like, how did you not see? But again, man, parents, they're looking at like, hey, he's doing this snorkeling program. He's got this opportunity. He's getting to volunteer at a park. This is all going to be on his college resume. You know, so it's I guess accepting other people's mistakes. You know, like.
Well, and you have 2 kids of your own now, so I mean, and I have 3. You can definitely see how it could be overlooked. Not overlooked, but like people are slick. You know,
yeah.
It's just one of those things. You know, you obviously your sister, is she older than you or younger?
2 years younger.
2 years younger. So, you know, I'm sure there were things going on, like, you know, they were also parenting your. I'm not excusing any of it, but being parents of our, you know, we're parents now. It's like, you know, that's the thing. I do feel like in today's society, though, it's a lot more. Like, I'll tell you one thing, and even before even obviously hearing this story, this just solidifies it even more. Like, my kids won't be doing anything like that. You know, if there's some sort of programming or something like that, I'm a part of it in some capacity. You know, I'm volunteering or I'm doing something, you know, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be a part of it, whether I want to or not. And again, I'm not saying that your parents did anything wrong. I know your parents. Your parents are phenomenal.
Yes. They are.
And you know, we weren't in their position at that time, you know, and the fact that you acknowledge that and like you know, you kept referencing, I weaponized my trauma against my parents. Like, it's huge to even get to that point of knowing and like making it right, making the you know, going through the amends process with them and stuff. And as far as that guy, fuck him, you know?
I just feel like I guess a big part of me wanting to use this platform to do it, the more people I can reach and show like, hey, I can do it, you can do it. You know, we see so many success stories, and we hear stories. We've had clients that have come through here. Oh. I mean, clients that have been shot by their own parents, like literally with a gun, locked in closets and beaten. I didn't grow up in a home like that. You know, like, so there's stories that, in my opinion, are worse than mine.
Right.
And I watch these people heal. And how freaking inspiring is that? You know, it's wild.
But it has the courage to even like bring it, like you said, to even bring it up and talk. You waited how long to even say, you know, what'd you 10 years longer?
Yeah,
right?
It's probably about a decade.
10 years, right? So that's a lot of like suppressed emotion, all of that. I can only imagine, you know, what you went through, but you just speaking about it, I think just there's a lot of, like Tom said, there's a lot of people who come through, whether it's in treatment, outside of treatment, if they're in AA, NA, whatever it is, they still don't talk about it and still don't feel comfortable talking about it. And like you said, it's not, the trauma doesn't drive the addiction, but it can gaslight it. And as long as people harbor those emotions and that trauma and don't address it and bring it out, I feel like the longer the road they're going to have in overcoming anything they struggle with, because trauma affects all aspects of your life. It doesn't just affect your substance use, your mental health. It affects your relationships with your spouse, with your parents. You know, there's so much collateral damage that occurs with it. You know, it's really hard for people to talk about. So it's rough.
Let me say this, like, and this is why today in sobriety, like having good people in your life, like you're two of a handful of people that I would sit down and like do this with right here, right now, record it with. Like, there's very few people I'd want sitting here talking about.
Well, let me just, and just to prove that, before we even hit record, I'm like, are you sure you want to do this? Do you think we should have a therapist in here? And Ben's like, no, I don't want a therapist in here. You're about the only two that I would want to do this with. So yeah, I respect that.
I mean, there are other people. Don't get me wrong. Like even our therapists, if they wanted to be in here, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But like I have such a good relationship with the two of you. Like I have people in my life today that I can talk to about anything. And I'll say this one last thing. I hope that you all realize, especially if you're watching on YouTube, I know it didn't zoom in, but the part that teared me up was not what I've been through.
I can make it zoom in.
The part that teared me up was talking about the value that it had for another human being.
Yeah.
So it was good tears, not negative. And that's what this process has done for me. That's why I'm such a big believer in 12 steps. Like it was literally the fourth and fifth step that helped me get through this. People don't realize the power of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. They don't realize that stuff is in there, solutions to all these problems.
Yeah.
In my case, it wasn't a therapist that sat down with me.
Right.
It was a crackhead that did a fourth and fifth step himself. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that there's not good therapists out there. Like I see our therapists break through to people all the time and have these moments. Regularly.
Well, if you could do both, do both. I mean, there's certain things that, because not all sponsors are like yours, I mean, I think there's value in both if you're afforded the opportunity to be able to have both, because there's certain things that they complement each other very well, I suppose the best way to put it.
Definitely.
Well, in wrapping this up, because now you get to have the opportunity to go work out the clients, in kind of in the same genre. I don't know if that's the right word. Anyways, we got a comment on YouTube and I just wanted to read it. My name is Levi, last name I won't say. I just got out of prison for the 4th time, but I just wanted to say this podcast really helped me get through really, really hard times. Thanks guys for that. And that was one day ago. And that was on episode 353. So Levi, I appreciate the comment. But the reason I wanted to say that was a day ago. This stuff is reaching people, and it's helping them. And Destiny and I were in Lakeview this past weekend. And I got to end the show on a good, laughing note. I'm standing up there doing this presentation.
Did you smile?
I think so.
Okay.
I think, yeah. I wasn't grumpy, Tom, up there.
Okay.
But there were these two guys that were young adults. I would say they're in their early 20s. All tatted up. One had a big neck tattoo and face tattoos and stuff, and they were sitting next to each other. And I'm up there talking, and they're like chuckling. Now simultaneously, I had the podcast up on the TV because I was talking about the podcast and everything else. And in Tom fashion, I'm like, "You guys have comments?" Because everybody would
grumpy Tom
it came out.
I'm like, "Do you guys have something to say?" Because I think everybody would like to hear it. And they actually, and then they kind of got like deer in the headlights. They were like, "No, actually, we were just talking about this podcast. They were in separate prisons." And they were talking amongst each other how they had the podcast on their tablets, and they were laughing about that. How like, oh man, we're actually, this is the guy that has this podcast out here. And so then I was
cool.
I was like, oh, sorry for putting you on blast.
That's what people love about Tom, though. Like, you will get the real deal. Like, I love listening to him on the phone when like parents call in. Like me, I like go like the soft route, like, oh, what's going on? Let's navigate this. Tom's just like, here's what you're going to do, and here's what you're doing wrong, and this is what you're going to start doing right. Yeah. And they just do it. Like there's something about the way that he delivers things, and he's right in his delivery. The way that he does it is very effective, and he ends up helping a lot of people.
I appreciate that.
He is a very direct person. I like that.
We call it grumpy, but really it's more tactful than that.
Sometimes.
Even Destiny and my wife, they were like texting when we were on our way up to Jacksonville, and Amanda like text Destiny something about like, yeah, he's been grumpy lately, and I'm like, I'm over this whole grumpy thing, So, anyways, thanks, Ben, for sharing that story. I know it'll help a lot of people. So, Dr. T, any final thoughts?
I thank you. I love you, Ben.
Love you too.
Like I said, every time I talk to you, I feel like I learned something new, and I admire you more and more every time. But I think you have a amazing story to share, and it helps so many people. And you're just such a lovable guy, and you're a genuinely good person. But the moral of this story I take to heart, and I will, even when patients share with me, you know, when you asked Tom and I that question, we both were kind of like, you know, didn't really know how to answer it. But you're right. You do have a great mentality and a great solution. And it's not a one size fits all by any means, but it will help a ton of people. And I will forever take that away myself when speaking with other clients and patients I encounter, and try to help them in that way too. So thank you.
Thank
Everything
you.
she said, I agree with.
Thank
I know you got to go work out the clients.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, Ben?
No, I always end with this when I talk to individuals about it, and I tell our therapists the same thing. If anybody ever wants to talk on a personal level with someone that gets it, they've been in a similar thing, feel free to reach out. Like I tell our clients, I tell our therapists in particular, like if you have a male client that's struggling with this, don't hesitate to tell my story for me and come get me.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, that is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us. info@realrecoverytalk.com. Again, that's info@realrecoverytalk.com. And I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I'm going to mention it now. Facebook, go to Real Recovery Talk support group. Real Recovery Talk, there's a Facebook page and there's a support group. There's two. So go to both of them. Hit the little follow button or whatever you have to do on there. You might have to put your email in to get into the support group, but we highly encourage you to do that. And that is it. We will see y'all later.